Hi guys, welcome back. This is Matt Chat number 85, featuring the fourth and final, and in my opinion best, segment of my interview with Miss Becky Heineman. We finally get to talk about the Bard's Tale and Dragon Wars, two of the best CRPGs of their time. I was just barely able to cram this into 15 minutes, so without further ado, here is Miss Becky Heineman.
All right, well, let's move ahead then. I want to talk a little bit about Bard's Tale. Because
Yes.
that's probably one of my best known episodes was when I reviewed that. So, what was your involvement with the
Uh-huh.
Bard's Tale series?
Brian Fargo had a high school buddy named Michael Cranford. And those two and myself, we were playing Wizardry all the time. And Frank Cranford kind of was like doing a D&D session where he was the game master. And all throughout everyone in Interplay, we said, we got to do a Wizardry Killer. So the project was given to Cranford to go ahead and write Tales of the Unknown. And that is the name of the game, Tales of the Unknown. And they thought they were going to call it The Bard's Tale. And the sequel is going to be The Archmage's Tale. And that sequel later would be The Thieves' Tale. But the game's name was Tales of the Unknown. The problem was Cranford, while he was okay coming together with the scripting and so forth, he couldn't do high performance graphics. And that's what I did. So at this point in time at Interplay, I started becoming more like the tools programmer or the technology programmer. So I wrote all the graphics routines. I wrote I did all the sound routines, the graphics animation team. I also did the graphic editor. We had an editor that was called Quick Draw, which was pretty interesting because Apple later on used that name. Damn it, we should have copyrighted it. But I wrote the art program that all the artists were using. So I wrote all the tools, the extractors, every single piece of software. So all the heavy lifting work, I wrote that. And whereas Cranford wrote the actual game logic and the text instruction and some of the disk routines and so forth. But, like font routines, all that stuff. I remember we had wars because I would write all the functions originally in an assembler called Merlin, and he was using a thing called Orca M. So I would have to first write it in Merlin, then I would either translate it to Orca M or give it to him and he'd translate Orca M, and we were constantly thinking, which kind of made it like a little rift between us. But once Bard's Tale was almost done, we had a couple bugs left. Cranford had to fix them. And Cranford then had the final floppy disk, and he came in and he held the disk hostage. And he told Brian to sign his contract, which changed the terms of the deal with him and Interplay, or he was not going to give the disk to Brian. And he was going to sell it himself or something like of that nature. But no matter what, he held it hostage. And we needed the money. So Brian signed the contract, and Cranford gave the disc, and the game shipped. And thankfully for Interplay, it made us a boatload of money. However, that contract had a clause in it which basically said the sequel, Bard's Tale 2, The Destiny Knight, was Cranford's and Cranford's alone. I did do some more function, more assembly, and more routines for Cranford, but basically the engine is Bard's Tale 1. I mean, he just changed the scenario code, but that's it. So he recycled all the code I used or I wrote, and he used all my tools and stuff like that. But unfortunately, Cranford, when he plays D&D as the dungeon master, he plays it in a style of if everybody in the party dies, the DM wins, which is totally against how D&D works. The DM's not supposed to be a participant. He's supposed to make it fun for everybody, but it's not like, hey, can the DM kill everyone? Well, unfortunately, that showed up in the way Destiny Knight played. Destiny Knight was a very difficult game. And in a way, it was because Cranford actually said, if people get killed, then he wins. It's like, okay. But once Destiny Knight was done, the contract between Cranford and Interplay ended. And that's when I said, you know what? I want to do Bard's Tale 3. I have ideas. Let's get Michael Stackpole involved so we can have a professional writer. And I'm just going to take all of Cranford's code because I considered it a POS, flushed it down the toilet, and started scratch. All the graphics routines I kept, but I improved upon them. And I added things like multi-size dungeons. I increased the number of animation frames I could do by doing better compression. I improved everything. I even came up with a two-voice audio on the Apple II, which is something that really wasn't done except for maybe music programs. And this was in a game that was where playing the music was an integral part of it. I even was able to shove in some Monty Python references like Sir Robin's tune, which of course it goes bravely ran away, and it makes you run away from combat. And then if you go to the temples, if you get healed, they go Donae, it's Requiem. Boom, you're healed. And because it was such a radical departure, another thing also is that I introduced female characters for obvious reasons. I was so pissed with Cranford. I kept saying, "Where are the girls?" Like, "Oh, girls don't play this." Like, if you only knew. So I added all sorts of new character classes and stuff with geomancers, the necromancers, and so forth. All this stuff, and I only add one more disc because I used some really sophisticated compression algorithms. So and then at the same time I was doing this game, I was doing the graphics routines and all the tools for a game that we know as Wasteland. Because that's why we look at Wasteland, you'll notice there's a lot of similarity in like the graphics for the monsters and so forth. It's the same code. It was my code I wrote. But there you go.
Coming
And that's
back
Bart's
to
Tale.
Cranford,
Mhm.
I told you about that email that he sent. He wanted to, quote unquote, correct me on a few things. And, it goes in this long sort of spiel. It claims you had nothing to do with Bard's Tale 1 and 2, that you were, quote, a hermit who
Mhm.
out of touch with the larger process. I mean, what's the guy's deal?
Two things. Why don't you ask him to explain to you how the graphics routines work? How did he do the animation? He probably won't be able to tell you because I'm the one who did it. That should right there tell you the truth. As far as me being a hermit, there's a semblance of truth to it. I, due to the fact of certain aspects of my upbringing and the fact I was running away from my transgenderism, I did intentionally lock myself in a room because I did not want to face the world because I was embarrassed about how I looked, about how I was. I harbored this big secret and I didn't want anyone to know. And I wanted everyone to call me Burger because I did not want them to call me that other name. Um, so unfortunately, he is right. I mentioned earlier is that my workday was get up, come into work until I'm literally too tired to work, leave. As far as out of touch, well, that's his word against mine. I produced all these games. I wrote all these games. I made a lot of money for Interplay. My track record speaks for itself. The technology about whether or not I worked on these games. I'm sorry, but I'm the one who wrote all the ports. I mean, I did the 2GS version of the games. I did, gosh, there was the C64 version. I did the fast load drivers in the C64. Um, there was just so much stuff in there. In fact, right now, I'll let you know, I'm actually taking my old Bard's Tale code and porting it to iPhone. And that's because I wrote the frickin' thing. So,
I've tried to contact him about this and
uh-huh.
perhaps, not surprisingly, haven't received any response. So,
Mhm.
but
Well, the trouble is after Bart's Tale 2, Michael went ahead and did his thing on his own. He did a thing called the Centauri Alliance, I think it was called, where he just took his Bart's with a code drop that he had of Bart's Tale 2 and used that as a basis to make a sci-fi game. And I understand it wasn't really a commercial success. I mean, it was okay. I mean, but it wasn't going to make him millions. And then he went to college for, of all things, a philosophy degree, and then he went into theology. And in fact, if you look in Bard's Tale 2, many of the cities that are in the game are all lifted right out of the Bible, the names they are. Um, so then he got religion into him. Um, don't know more about that, other than I know that, he probably it wouldn't be, I actually have not spoken to Cranford since my transition. So I don't know how he even thinks about it, but I'm certain since that letter of yours came after my transition, he may also think ill of me because my transition would go against his religious beliefs.
I wanted to talk though a little bit about Dragon Wars.
Yes.
Which, you know,
I mean, Bard's Tale 4 until 3 months before we shipped it.
right, exactly. You know, so many innovations on the engine there. Well, what are your thoughts on Dragon Wars?
I think it was my best work. It was like, as you saw from Bard's Tale 2 to Bard's Tale 3, it was a huge leap in technology. As I was making Bard's Tale 3, I was already making notes of where I was going to take the engine next. So once we finished Bard's Tale 3 and got it out the door, I then went ahead and from a clean sheet of paper wrote the Bard's Tale 4 engine. And this engine was totally using Windows and stuff like that. I had a huge screen for the graphics, so it's now a majority of the screen, yet I still had little bars because I've said, okay, originally in Bard's Tale we had the line with the text and so forth. I thought, what if we just have the name of the character and then had graphic bars for your health and for your magic so we could put more information in a little space? But you can see it's still the same design. You know, we had the little pillar with the magic spells. We had the box on the bottom for the text. But since many times the text would be more, I would have a pop-up window. I had daylight, sunsets. I even had versions of it which actually had a sun, which moved behind the graphics. But we ran out of space for that one. The auto mapping was in a pseudo 2D. And I even had the ability to print because I wrote printer drivers for all the popular printers then. So I had an image writer, a laser writer, a silent type, and if you hit Control P, I would detect what printer you had, and I would actually print out to the printer. All these little innovations were done in there, and then back to I wanted a story. Mike Stackpole was busy doing novels at the time, so he wasn't available. But we went and found Paul O'Connor. He started to work, and he made the scenarios. In fact, I actually found the book of all his notes and all my programming notes and everything because I just told him, design me a game, let me figure out how to make it real. So he just went nuts. I mean, with his gigantic maps and all this text and all this stuff. And I said, well, hell or high water, I will figure this out and shove all this game into a couple of floppy disks. And I did. And then one of the problems was that Paul O'Connor, when he wrote the story, just like the same problem I had with Bard's Tale 3, was that the scenarios are very linear. Like you have this one, you have a couple of side quests, that's it. But I wanted this game to be truly open world. I mean, you start off in the purgatory, that prison, but I intentionally put 6 different ways to get out of that city. And each one takes you to a completely different side quest. And then you can then go back to the other cities, but you could then take them in any order. I wanted it so no matter how it was, only when you were powerful enough to defeat Namtar, the bad guy, did that scenario open. Until then, you could play anything at any time, at any way. And that was something that was really a huge challenge. And one of the problems was that some of the stories that I was given was like, oh, if you defeat this castle, we're supposed to talk about this war you did, but you don't necessarily win it. So I had to write all this text. I must have wrote a novel's worth of text in addition what Paul did to fill in all the blanks. And I even wrote extra side stories about princesses and this brother and sister. And I even had one place where you actually ended the game because you ended up ruling a kingdom. So therefore, even though it was technically a good ending, you didn't actually win the game because Namtar's still running around. So now you from now on have to protect your castle, your kingdom that you now ended up ruling. So it was just everything I could think of on what would be the next generation game. And honestly, had the series kept going, I would have done another engine, which would have been more innovative, and I would have gone on, and who knows what sort of what Bard's Tale or Dragon Wars would look like today had I been continually improving the series. It may have been World of Dragon Wars for all we know. It's one of those things that will what if it forever. But Dragon Wars is one of the titles I am most proud of in my entire career.